Hello, this webinar is titled The Trap of Groupthink, and it's a part of the 10-part series on the 100-year anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic. Well, what is groupthink? Defining it, groupthink is a psychological phenomena that can occur in groups of people, rather than critically evaluating information. The group members begin to form quick opinions that match the group consensus. And at the point where Titanic had struck an iceberg and passengers were considering what to do, this was an overwhelming phenomenon. And what I'll do now for a few minutes is just quote directly from the Titanic survivors' book that was written. Here's the quote. "The shock was almost imperceptible. The first officer did not apparently realize that the great ship had received her death wound, and none of the passengers had the slightest suspicion that anything more than a usual minor sea accident had happened. Hundreds who had gone to their berths and were asleep were unawakened by the vibration. The tendency of the whole ship's company, except the men in the engine department, was to make light of, and in some instances even to ridicule, the thought of danger to so substantial a ship. Few among the more than 2,000 aboard could have had a thought of danger. The man who had stood up in the smoking room to say that the Titanic was vulnerable, or that in a few minutes 2/3 of her people would be face to face with death, would have been considered a fool or a lunatic." And this is one person's story. A woman that went up on the top of the deck. "I went up on the top boat deck in a dressing gown and found only a few persons there, who had come up similarly to inquire why we had stopped, but there was no sort of anxiety in the minds of anyone. We saw through the smoking room window a game of cards going on, and went in to inquire if they knew anything. Seems they felt more of the jar, and looking through the window had seen a huge iceberg go by close to the side of the boat. They thought we had just grazed it with a glancing blow, and that the engines had been stopped to see if there was any damage done. No one, of course, had any conception that the vessel had been pierced below by part of the submerged iceberg. The game went on without any thought of disaster, and I retired to my cabin to read until we went on again. You know, I never saw any of those players or those onlookers again." The admiration felt by the passengers and crew for the matchlessly appointed vessel was translated in those first few moments into a confidence which for some proved deadly. The pulsing of the engines had ceased, and the steamship lay just as though she were awaiting the order to go on again after some trifling matter had been adjusted. No ship ever sailed the seas that gave her passengers more confidence and more cool security. Within a few minutes, stewards and other members of the crew were sent around to arouse the people. Some utterly refused to get up. The stewards had almost to force themselves through the doors of the staterooms to make the somnolent, that is, the sleeping, appreciate their peril. And many of them, it is believed, were drowned like rats in a trap because they refused to get up. The woman continues, "We all walked up with our belts tied on over our clothing, but even then presumed that this was only a wise precaution that the captain was taking, and that we should return in a short time and retire to bed. There was a total absence of any panic or any expressions of alarm, and I suppose this can be accounted for by the exceedingly calm night and the absence of any signs of the accident. Once on deck, many hesitated to enter the swinging lifeboats. The glassy sea, the starlit sky, the absence in the first few moments of intense excitement gave them the feeling that there was only some slight mishap, that those who got into the boats would have a chilly half-hour below and might later be laughed at. It was such a feeling as this, from all accounts, which caused John Jacob Astor and his wife to refuse the places offered them in the first boat and to retire to the gymnasium. Then one of the boilers exploded. For the first time there was a feeling of panic. Husbands sought for wives and children. Families gathered together. Many who were asleep hastily caught up their clothing and rushed on deck. A moment before the men had been joking about the lifeboats. They were saying, "Try this one." One man said, "They're the very latest thing this season. Everybody's wearing them now." But now the officers manning the boats said, "Stand back. The women and children come first." And thus Titanic, 2 hours later, sunk to her demise. So here's some questions to ponder as it pertains to the trap of groupthink and how it expressed itself on the Titanic, but questions for us today. Groupthink can equal death. Where do you muster courage to go against groupthink? Where do you see groupthink exist in today's society, in public schools, universities, media, government? Give your own examples. How do you cultivate a mindset of thinking for yourself? Here are some resources that might help you along the way. This Worldview training channel on YouTube that continues this 10-part series, as well as U.S. Civics training and the 21-day faith experiment. My name's Craig Seibert. Thanks for listening.